Elara called me at midnight and whispered, "She's outside." I was already awake because the panic in her earlier messages had felt wrong. When I reached her apartment, she pulled me behind the curtain and pointed toward a parked car. A woman sat inside, motionless, watching. "That's Adrian's wife," Elara said. "She somehow knows about me." Her hands shook, yet the fear in her voice was tangled with devotion. She wasn't terrified of losing herself. She was terrified of losing him. For months, I had listened to her defend their relationship. Adrian was married, but according to him, the marriage had been over for years. He and his wife supposedly shared a home only because they wanted stability for their child. They slept separately, lived separate lives, and stayed under one roof only to avoid hurting the child. I wanted to believe her because she was my closest friend, but every explanation sounded too neat. Whenever I asked why the divorce had never happened, Adrian always had another reason. Timing, money, family, the child. There was always something. That night, the woman in the car never approached. She simply sat there, her face hidden beyond the windshield, as if she were waiting for a confession nobody intended to give. Elara kept pacing, checking her phone every few seconds. Adrian wasn't answering. The silence bothered me more than the stranger outside. If he was truly separated, why would this situation feel like a secret? Near dawn, headlights flashed and the parked car finally pulled away. Elara sank onto the couch with relief. I should have felt relieved too, yet I couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had watched without creating a scene. Most people who discovered betrayal demanded answers. She had done nothing. 3 days later, Adrian appeared again with flowers and apologies. He claimed his wife had become suspicious because she was struggling to accept that their relationship was ending. Elara believed him immediately. I watched her smile return and wondered whether love could make intelligent people volunteer for blindness when the truth stood directly in front of them. 1 week later, Elara received a message request from a woman named Serena. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was another attempt to scare her away from Adrian. By evening, curiosity won. She opened the message while I sat beside her, and within minutes the color drained from her face. Serena did not sound angry. That was what unsettled me. She sounded confused. She asked whether Elara knew her husband. She asked how long they had been talking. Then she said something that made the room feel smaller. She had never heard Adrian mention a separation. As far as she knew, they were happy. Elara reread that line again and again. Happy. Not struggling. Not trapped. Not waiting for paperwork. Happy. The conversation continued for hours. Serena shared details that were impossible to fake. Family photographs. Plans they had discussed together. Celebrations. Small routines. Future goals. None of it sounded like the life of a couple ending a marriage. It sounded like a family moving forward. I watched Elara's certainty crack. For the first time since she had met Adrian, she stopped defending him. She stared at the messages as though they belonged to a language she recognized but could no longer understand. "What if she's lying?" she asked. I wanted to protect her, yet honesty felt kinder than comfort. I told her that strangers rarely invent years of details. Lies usually chase drama. Serena's story was full of everyday moments. By midnight, Elara was crying. Not because she hated Serena, and not because she feared judgment. She cried because every memory with Adrian was suddenly contaminated by doubt. The promises that once felt romantic now sounded rehearsed. The excuses that once felt convincing now felt suspicious. Still, even then, she searched for reasons to believe him. Love does not disappear when evidence arrives. Sometimes it fights harder. Sometimes it builds walls around the very truth trying to enter. As I listened to her sob, I realized the mystery was no longer whether Adrian had lied. The mystery was how much of his story had ever been real. The next afternoon, Elara confronted Adrian. She showed him the messages and demanded an explanation. I expected panic. Instead, he looked wounded, almost offended that anyone would question him. He said Serena was in denial. He said she had always pretended problems did not exist. He claimed they had discussed separation many times, but she refused to accept reality. Every answer arrived smoothly, as though he had practiced it. For a while, even I felt the pull of his version. That was what made him dangerous. He never sounded defensive. He sounded reasonable. When Elara asked about the photographs, he explained them away. When she mentioned future plans, he said they were for their child. When she repeated Serena's claim that the marriage was happy, he laughed sadly and said some people preferred illusions. By the end of the conversation, Elara looked exhausted rather than convinced, yet she stayed. The certainty she had lost was replaced by confusion, and confusion can be easier to live with than heartbreak. Something about his performance bothered me. He answered every accusation immediately, but he never seemed surprised by any of it. It was as though he had expected Serena to speak eventually. That night, I reviewed everything I knew. Every story. Every excuse. Every contradiction. A pattern emerged. Adrian always controlled information by keeping people apart. Elara knew only his version. Serena knew only her version. Neither woman had ever spoken directly until now. The realization felt important enough to act on. I contacted Serena myself and asked whether she would be willing to compare timelines. She agreed. Together, we examined dates, messages, trips, and celebrations. Piece by piece, a clearer picture appeared. The overlap was impossible to ignore. On days Adrian claimed he was sleeping in a separate room, he had been celebrating anniversaries. On weekends he supposedly spent alone, he was attending family events. The cracks in his story widened until they became impossible to cross. By sunrise, we were no longer searching for answers. We were gathering proof and preparing to show both women exactly who he was all along. 2 days later, we arranged a meeting. Adrian believed he was meeting Elara alone. Instead, he found Serena and me waiting beside her. The confidence disappeared from his face so quickly that it felt like watching a mask fall. For months, he had controlled the story by speaking to each woman separately. Now, every version stood in the same room. At first, he tried the familiar strategy. He told Serena she was misunderstanding events. He told Elara she was overreacting. He insisted there were explanations for everything. Then Serena produced messages. Elara produced messages. I presented the timeline we had assembled together. Each piece alone could have been explained away. Together they formed a wall. The room grew quieter with every contradiction. Dates failed to match, promises collided, statements changed. Adrian kept adjusting his story, but every adjustment created a new problem. The man who always had an answer suddenly needed time to think. That was when Serena revealed the detail that ended the performance. She explained that after speaking with Elara, she had reviewed years of records and discovered other women hidden between the same excuses, different names, different periods, the same script, the same claims about a marriage that was supposedly ending, the same requests for patience, the same promises about a future that never arrived. Elara closed her eyes when she heard that. I knew she was grieving not only the relationship, but also the version of herself that had trusted it. Adrian denied everything, yet nobody interrupted him anymore. His words no longer carried authority. They sounded like noise. For the first time since I had known him, he was not controlling the conversation. The women he had kept apart were comparing notes in real time, and every attempt to divide them failed. Eventually, Serena stood and thanked Elara for telling the truth. The kindness of that moment surprised me more than the deception that came before it. Neither woman owed the other compassion, yet both had suffered from the same manipulation. Adrian left alone. Weeks later, Elara told me she finally understood why the situation had always felt wrong. The mystery had never been whether one woman was lying. The mystery was why the story required everyone to remain isolated. Once the walls between people disappeared, the truth became visible. Looking back, I still remember the woman sitting silently inside that parked car. I had mistaken her silence for uncertainty. In reality, she had been searching for answers. In the end, she found them, and the man who built his power on secrets lost the ability to hide behind them for good, without another believable excuse remaining. That was the day the story changed hands.